So we're going to open it up to questions, and I guess I will get the ball rolling. I have a question, and specifically for Jill and Mary, since you guys both represent more of the government regulatory perspective of this whole situation. We've heard so far today about a lot of questions, a lot of unanswered questions, things that we don't know yet about the impacts of cannabis on health. The plant itself. And I was wondering, how do you navigate through all of these policy challenges when there simply may not be enough evidence to support your decision making?
I think in terms of road safety, we're moving our solution away from looking at first aid levels and actual amounts in the bloodstream and blood drug concentrations to more looking at options for measuring actual impairment levels. And so in doing this, we can also then include fatigue and pharmaceuticals and other drugs or other impairing factors for that person. So I think that's really the problem we're trying to solve anyway. It's not so much how much drug is in this person's body, it's in the totality of that person's experience and condition with a lot of factors at play. Culley use is quite common, so people will consume alcohol and they'll look at cannabis and maybe some cocaine, and Culley use is very common. So we're looking at overall safety of that driver and risks and reducing social harms. So I think the real problem to solve is looking at how impaired is this person, how safe are they to be on the road, rather than focusing just on first aid levels. So luckily, we don't have to worry as much about all the plant characteristics and all the other different characteristics specifically, but more just how is it affecting that person.
That's a really good question because there are so many unknowns. I know that when Health Canada was working with the other agencies like Stats Canada and Public Safety Canada, it was very difficult to get data on cannabis pricing, cannabis use, all of that information that was out there, but because it was illegal, it was really hard to find that information. And I think the best thing that we can do is develop policies with the knowledge that we have at the time, knowing that those policies are going to have to change, and probably a number of times as we gather data. It's not perfect, it's certainly not perfect in terms of human health, but it's what we have to do right now.
I appreciate that. Any questions from the audience? Yeah, and with that.
I have a question for Ms. Culley. For purposes of plant breeders' rights, exactly how is cultivar defined? Is it genetic, is it biochemical, or what?
Yeah, it's actually based on the phenotype. So you actually, the process is very different from getting a patent where it's all done in written documentation and you provide that to an examiner and they do all this background work. With plant breeders' rights, you actually have an inspector come and you actually have to grow trials that show side by side the most similar that you can find of existing varieties that are already out there, and you grow that side by side the cultivar that you're trying to get protection on, and you have to demonstrate distinct differences in a number of in certain characteristics, and then you have to also demonstrate that cultivar is stable and well, the uniqueness, and it's also the distinctness, unique, and that it's stable over generations.
So clearly it helps if you are dealing with something that is close to an inbred line. Genetic heterogeneity within a cultivar is potentially problematic, isn't it?
Or clonally propagated. So currently cannabis would be viewed like any other clonally propagated crop plant. So the list is long. Apples is a good example. So you can't take the seed of a honeycrisp and plant it and get a honeycrisp apple. Same with cannabis. So you show it with clonally propagated trees, and that's how cannabis would work. So currently there are a few applications in the pipeline. They're all posted on the CFIA Plant Breeders' Rights Office website, and none of them have gone all the way through that examination process. So it's going to be really interesting to see how that unfolds over time.
Thank you.
you please push the button on your mic? Thank you. And I just wanted to remind our audience to please state your name before you ask a question.
Jörg Bullmann, Microsoft Labs. It's a question for Tom. Tom, you brought up this sticky issue of cannabis odor. Is it actually known which metabolite or which metabolites are the ones that cause what most people perceive as an unpleasant odor?
Yeah, so I actually think it's a combination of metabolites. I did mention the thermal deposition method for measuring the terpenes, or is mentioned on the slide, where you can analyze the amount of those terpenes by mass spec. We do know things like pinene, limonene, other compounds can cause smells, as well as freshly cut cannabis producing compounds like hexanol, for example.
So I'd like to come right away there.
Yeah.
So I don't believe that, because terpenes like pinene smells like pine forest, limonene smells like lime, right? Most terpenes have actually a pleasant aroma note. They've been used in the perfume industry, in the aroma industry. It's a few that have a gasoline type smell, like myrcene, terpinolene, for example, and maybe better caryophyllene. And perfumers are really good in associating by GC nose profiling individual compounds with individual fragrance impressions. So is that not yet being done for cannabis?
Oh, yeah, so it is possible to determine the profile of not just terpenes, but other volatile compounds being produced by the plants. And it's a complex mixture, right? But they all contribute to the smell of cannabis.
Good. So I'm a scientist. Every time I hear complex, I know it's head waving, or we don't really know and we haven't done the work yet. I'm convinced if you worked with someone in the perfume industry who do this all the time, you can find out very quickly which of the compounds, and not this complex mixture, but which compounds in the mixture are the ones that give you the unpleasant odor. And then talk with Greg, and Greg breathes them away. And then this whole issue is solved. Unless it is not the terpenes, for example, or one of the terpenes, or a few of them, but something that is just a byproduct, the sulfur-containing conjugate that you just cannot get rid of, right?
Yeah, and I think the notion of breeding away the terpenes is an interesting one for the purpose of odor control, but at the same time from a consumer.
Don't breed away the terpenes, and all of them.
Breeding away the
find the ones that. Again, this is a great example for the interplay, the interdisciplinarity in this forum today. There's a plant genetics, there is a regulation, there is a public, right, the odor and stuff, and landlord that kicks you out. There's a scientific solution to that you guys need to get to, right?
Yeah, and I think there is also a market demand and consumer preference for certain types of smells in cannabis, and there's also a user experience in a lot of people who have to consume cannabis. So whether or not a product with a non-cannabis smell would be successful, I think is yet to be determined by the market.
Thank you, Tom.
Turn on your mic.
I'm just going to add just briefly to that. And one of the things I'm really excited for is to see consumer preference research start to come out about what people like and what is going to be all over the place. People like different types of apples. They like different types of tomatoes. And cannabis is going to be similar. And it's going to be fascinating to see that come out because of the diversity of what's out there.
Just really quickly, and I think it'll be interesting to see what happens with putting cannabinoids and terpenes and things into beverages. It might be quite a different experience than you get smoking. So maybe some of those nasty things. Once a bit of time, I'm not going to go over very well with beverages. I don't know.
Chris Spooner. I just have a question. Just in practice, what I've been seeing is access, and particularly through the recreational routes versus the medical routes. certainly we're seeing patients wanting to bypass the medical route because of the onerous paperwork that's involved and the lack of authorizers in this case. And I'm wondering, I take a look at it when I took a look at the regulations in terms of differences in terms of Part 8 and Part 14 and definitions around practitioners and health practitioners, and how one's a narcotics control regulation definition and one's a food and drug regulation. I think that sort of limits some of the access to other potential prescribing professions in terms of helping patients access through the medical route. But I think there's a couple interesting things around how patients are starting to sort of sidestep and move into the recreational distribution model to access medical. And I'm wondering if perhaps maybe you might make some comments on where Health Canada might be able to address some of those issues within the regs.
A little bit of a stab at that. As we heard this morning, there's a lot of products out there that are finding medical supply and recreational supply that are identical. So that theoretically you could be prescribed this combination or this formula from a certain company and you only find the same thing in recreational. If it's labeled as something else, that's again a problem. But then you get the situation we heard about this morning where people are basically writing their own prescriptions and really feel like they can be, I'm going to buy something that's really high in CBD because I know it's going to work for me, without the supervision of a physician. I think could be an issue.
And that's my point is that there is a regulatory burden that seems to fall on just one or two professions, nurse practitioners and medical doctors, that seems to be creating an impediment, and then adding things like cost for various different people to access those as well too. So I think there's an unintended consequences that are happening within the marketplace, as well as many of the LPs will start to move and say, why would we invest in a medical framework when we could just move that into the recreational space and leave that, not make that investment, which I find is curious, because the original intention was to make access available for medical users, and now somehow we've ended up with a recreational market, which in my mind is somewhat problematic.
I was going to say, I saw a hand. You want to answer that question? No. Okay.
Did you have another question?
Yeah, a question for Mary, and I know you don't represent the federal government. This is Jonathan Page with Aurora Cannabis, by the way. You don't represent the federal government, but it seems interesting to me that legalization of cannabis and the expansion of medical cannabis is really a flagship sort of mandate piece for this Trudeau government, and yet other parts of the federal system, like Business Development Bank of Canada and Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada, and various other parts of what we would think of as like agricultural innovation, have not moved forward at all. NRC IRAP has actually done a really great job of embracing the opportunity. So I wonder, do you know what's happening on the other fronts and why we've seen such delays in, say, funding of small business by BDC on cannabis areas?
I know there's agricultural money just become available fairly recently, so I think that's a big step in the right direction. I actually had a meeting with BDC on this week, and they said, no, not going to touch cannabis, just like outside of our.
Which is taxpayers'
I don't know
dollars.
exactly why, except, do they want to see their headline in the newspapers saying BDC funds grow off or something like that? I think we should be past that, but they're not. I offered to talk to them about it, but I didn't get a lot of reception there.
Okay, thanks.
Does that answer your question, sort of? No.
What about AAFC? I mean, I add too that we've been growing hemp legally as an agricultural crop since 1998, and yet it seems to be completely off the radar as a crop.
Sorry, could you just for those who might not know what AFC is?
So that's Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada. That's the federal Department of Agriculture.
Well, hemp can now be grown in Canada, and so the parts that were not allowed to be used before, because you could use the stems and you could use the seeds. So you could send your fiber seeds for grinding up and putting in health products. harvest the flowers and sell them to cannabis producers.
Thanks.
Any other questions over here?
Yeah, I was just following up with the IP protection.
Sorry, go ahead. That's nice.
So you mentioned the plant breeders rate, so my understanding is primarily about hemp, right? You said there is cannabis as well. Just looked up the rates, there's nothing registered regulated. The plant breeders rate is very specific stuff, right? So if we didn't use hemp for years, right? There are many varieties that are registered and approved for cultivation outdoor, and then breeders rate for the eco grows.
So there's two separate things. There's variety registration and there's plant breeders' rights. And variety registration, hemp falls under that line. And yes, you register a variety, and then there's actually only a list of varieties that you're actually allowed to grow that meet the hemp requirements in Canada. But I think it's called marijuana under the plant breeders' rights, but you will find that in the list. It is eligible for plant breeders' rights. I don't think they've published specific guidelines like they have for other crops because it's so new. So they haven't talked about like which traits you have to measure and like all of that, but it's a process that is underway, and you can find there's at least 5 filings currently in Canada.
Yeah, within right now, breeders' right, you're right, completely separate. The breeders' right is just captured if you produce breeders' foundation certified plot of seed that's on the base of royalty of 8%, something like that. That's what breeders' rights are. But for registration of new varieties, you don't have to grow them side by side. You can grow in the same season, different locations.
Yeah, it's 2 separate things altogether.
Side by side.
Okay, so you have to grow, no, but to do a plant breeding trial, you have to show that they're not being like the road next to each
5
other.
mile separation.
Yeah, so, but I didn't mean side by
Just to make
side.
sure.
Yeah,
People both start doing it.
all right, pointing. You can grow them in pots too.
Thank you. My name is Rena Shields, and my question is primarily for Mary. In establishing the data and the actual information, I've launched an association, Endocannabinoid, and my interest is how to create the collection of data to navigate the licensing, because there you have the recreational, you have the medical, and I'm interested in preventative care so that you can actually look at the products that are going to come out. What sort of process? Because I've actually spoken with lots of different people, but it's quite ambiguous as to the exact steps necessary to put the infrastructure in place to first off set up the surveys that are necessary for data collection, to actually communicate with the general public to find out where their needs are, and then also establishing a relationship with the actual LPs.
I think that's really outside of my limited expertise. I would, if at all possible, try and talk to Public Safety Canada and Stats Canada to see how they structure their surveys that they carry out all the time. A lot of surveys are ongoing year after year. Perhaps if you structure it in a way that's known to them, it might have a little bit easier time.
Okay, so the focus should actually go towards Stats Canada as far as establishing the relationship to facilitate the infrastructure for that type of data collection.
Yeah, but if you have more questions on that, just let me know and I'll pass it on to somebody who knows more.
Okay, great, thank you.
So question for Jill, my name is John Shepard. Your comment or your description about the potential process of that fairly complex assessment of impairment makes perfect sense to me, but I'm a physician, I'm not a lawyer. And I think we've already seen in the news the number of times that it's being commented upon that this is going to be challenged on all kinds of grounds around constitutionality, probable cause, et cetera. And I guess in a legal system where a drug case can be thrown out on the question of whether a dog sat or squatted by the side of the road, how do you think this is actually going to work? And it's less a comment, but it's just more a comment, I guess. I just see this being absolutely impossible to prove, as opposed to alcohol, where at the end of the day, you've got a machine which is proven reliable.
Yeah, it's a valid point. We are expecting a number of challenges. I think that's to be expected, just given how new this is. We had the same with alcohol for years, and it's well established now, and that's okay, but we have a long way to go. And there are review grounds that people can appeal and go through that process. I guess what we do have, though, is with the DRE program, the drug recognition experts, they go through such a robust set of tests. It takes a long time. So they're checking all sorts of physiological and clinical indicators. So anything from pupil dilation and constriction to response to infrared light, UV light, muscle tone, blood pressure, body temperature. They do an interview with the person, ask them a bunch of questions. So there's a lot of observation happening, a lot of indicators that they're going on. And their expert advice is taken by the courts as such. They go through quite a bit of training and testing to get where they are. So I guess that's what we have so far. But we'll see what comes. Yeah, we just a good point.
We have a question in the back.
Yeah, Zamir Pancho, SFU. Tom, can you comment on the use of irradiation on dried cannabis product?
So irradiation is just for everyone else in the audience, it's a method of reducing the bioburden on cannabis. It uses there's two existing methods that are commonly used in the industry today. Gamma radiation, which comes off of 60, as well as E-beam, which is basically an oversized cathode ray tube. Basically, speaking from our own process validations internally, with the number of samples across the varieties that we have run at a series of doses, we have not seen any changes in both the cannabinoids as well as other VOCs that we have reference standards for. So from that perspective, it seems to be fairly benign. It's used in other foods as well, such as garlic salts and powders are commonly irradiated, as well as medical devices such as syringes and IV bags. And then I guess also to note is this process does not result on in the material becoming radioactive, and typically does not increase the temperature of the material in a significant manner, which causes degradation either.
Oh, yes, thank you.
Hi, Alexander Singleton. My question is more for the drug recognition expert, like the questions. So I've looked into it a little bit, but one thing I'm a little worried about is anxiety also has a lot of those symptoms that you had described, like pupils dilating, skin, maybe slurring speech or mixing up words. It took a while for the alcohol to pin a number within the blood, and it actually activates the field cells, so it's pretty easy to measure, like the current. But as far as I'm aware, THC doesn't really have that same property. So do you see that there is a lot of research development that's going to get to that point where we look at the pharmacodynamics of what's happening inside the system and how we can analyze that on the spot? I know it's fairly early days, and from some of the machines and instrumentation, they have a lot of disclaimer claims, like this is still pre-production. Do you think that there's going to be a lot of issues with the DRE on the psychological or mental health basis? Confusing, perhaps impairment, but and how long do you think it might take us to get to a breathalyzer for THC? Because I know that the saliva swab, that doesn't really tie to impairment.
That's true. Yeah, so I should mention that the drug recognition expert experts also need to validate their opinion with the toxicology report. So they do take a blood or urine sample, send it to the lab, forensic lab, and then get the results back. So the results that come back have to match the drug category that they called. If it doesn't, it gets thrown out. So they have to be precise to get that right. The other thing is that they're looking at so many different variables together. So medical conditions may cause 1 or 2 or 3 even of those things as mentioned with anxiety, could be blood pressure, could be the dilation of the pupils. But because they're looking at the totality and quite a few indicators, I'm less certain that that will happen. It might. And if it does, there's also a review ground that the result is because of a medical condition. So people are able to appeal on that ground.
One thing I've heard quite a bit of discussion about lately is creating a device that will detect impairment period. It doesn't matter whether it's from whether it's alcohol or any kind of drug or prescription medication. Okay.
That's what I'm shooting for.
Yeah, because I think to me it's more to the point, but I'm not an expert in that. But you know, if you recognize almost anything that's going to make it so that you are not driving the road could be key. And I think maybe you can comment on this, but testing how much THC happens to be in the saliva is probably not really a good indication of impairment. It's a good indication that you probably consumed some, but maybe 2 hours before you're actually impaired.
Yeah. Recent use and presence for sure, but it doesn't necessarily show impairment, which is why it can only be used as a screening tool, not criminal.
We have time for 1 or 2 last questions. Yes.
So there was a really interesting comment about patents and about companies rushing to file lots and lots of patents, and I've read some of them and they seem to me a bit fluffy. So in your expert opinion, how many of those patents are actually going to stand and be defended? And are we just in a world of investor baiting?
Yeah, it's an interesting thing to watch. I mean, I think the examination process, I'm sure, will weed a lot of them out. But there are times that patents get through outside of cannabis, forget that for now, and you're like, how did this ever issue? And so if it makes it through examination and if you have, so one tip, I guess, is if you have your eye on an application that you think should not go through to being granted to issuing, you can provide the examiner with additional information that they can review in the process of their examination prior to it issuing. And that process does not cost, it costs you money if you hire an IP lawyer to put it together for you or an agent. But that's something that you can do to sort of protect your area if that's of interest. And then some of these I'm sure will issue in various jurisdictions, maybe not every jurisdiction, and then they could be invalidated, but that's a much more expensive process. If you're up against invalidation, you basically have to start. If you want to invalidate another person's patent, it's a process and it's a legal process, and you much rather prefer it doesn't issue in the first place. So I can't answer how many of them. It is impossible to know, but they won't all make it through, and they may not even try. You know, it might just be a file and then they let it lapse over time. But everything's going to be different. So watch your space.
Thank you very much. If anybody else has any other remaining questions, I encourage you to come find them during the coffee break. Otherwise, please help me give a round of applause for